I started drinking and smoking when I was sort of about 14 years old. I mean, I quit smoking in the end, but I carried on drinking for about a quarter of a century. You know, I'd start drinking Friday lunchtime, I'd drink through, I'd sort of fall asleep, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and drink some more to get back to sleep. And then you're in the same state Monday morning, so that's where you're sort of ringing in sick on Monday. But then you're kind of sat at home with nothing to do, feeling awful and sorry for yourself. So I started drinking again. Why am I doing this? What's changed in my body that allows me to consume a higher amount of this poison? If I can quit, I must be able to moderate.
With the whole, I'll just have one. That is like, that doesn't work with me, and I realised it very early on.
Is what's learnt cannot be unlearnt.
The classic, we've got the 4 a.m. flight out. Do you want a beer? No, I want a coffee. Leave me alone.
Yeah, straight to the Wetherspoons in Gatwick. Yeah.
Welcome back to the Not Quite a Pod. Today we've got William with us. William, do you just quickly want to introduce yourself and let everyone know a bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm William Porter, and I started off writing Alcohol Explained, and then Alcohol Explained 2, and then a couple of nicotine books and a sort of a diet and fitness book. But the main one I'm known for is the original one, which is Alcohol Explained.
I can't wait for this because there's so much that you've covered in the work that you do. So the first question I'm going to ask, for those who don't know, what is the one that everyone knows you for, Alcohol Explained? Like, where did it all come about from, and how did that journey begin?
So he started off, unsurprisingly, with my own drinking. So I started drinking and smoking when I was sort of about 14 years old, and carried on merrily. I mean, I quit smoking in the end, but I carried on drinking for about a quarter of a century, 25 years, and it just got heavier and heavier and heavier. Funny enough, I would never drink every day. There were occasions when I would drink every day, like if I was on holiday or something. But whenever I was at work, I would always kind of stop during the week and then drink again at the weekends. Yep. But it just got heavier and heavier and heavier. And it got to the point where I'd start drinking Friday lunchtime, I'd drink through, I'd sort of fall asleep, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and drink some more to get back to sleep, and then I'd wake up in the morning and start drinking again just to get up and get out of bed, and it would go on. And obviously the problem with drinking one of the many problems with drinking at that level is you come to like Sunday and you feel like rubbish, so you kind of have a couple of drinks to level out, feel normal again, end up drinking more and more and more, and then you're in the same state Monday morning. So that's where you're sort of ringing in sick on Monday. But then you're kind of sat at home with nothing to do, feeling awful and sorry for yourself. So I started drinking again. So those weekend binges were becoming more and more and more unmanageable. And it was in February 2014, so just over 10 years ago, I crawled out the back end of basically 5 days of constant drinking. I'd woken up and my wife had left with the kids. I don't even really remember them going. It was all just a blur. And I just thought, I can't keep doing this. So I stopped. But what I hadn't actually planned to write Alcohol Explained or anything. But I think during the years of me drinking, I'd always, and people say don't overthink things. I'm really bad. I like overthinking things, and I would sit there drinking and just be thinking about it. I was never a particularly sociable drinker, so I was always happy just sitting at home drinking on my own. And I was always thinking about, why am I doing this? What's it doing for me? Is it the taste? Is it the effect? Why am I reaching for a drink now? So I was kind of picking it to pieces. And I'd done quite a lot of research on it as well, because there were bits that would become kind of like, I feel like this or this after a drink. So what's the reason for that? So I started reading into like the chemical and physiological side of things. So basically, Alcohol Explained, it's not an autobiography or anything. It's literally just an explanation of how alcohol works on us, and kind of like the chemical, physiological and psychological factors that all together make up alcohol addiction.
That's really interesting. What was your biggest shock when you were doing the research for the book, the project? Like, what was the one thing that came out of it that you were like, oh, I never saw that coming?
Yeah, so one of the most basic things, I think, and one of the key factors underlying all of it is how alcohol affects us on a physiological scale. So most people nowadays are on board with the fact that alcohol is a drug. Years ago, people didn't even think of it as a drug, but it is a drug. And it's the class of drugs called sedatives or depressants. And when I say depressant, I'm using it in its chemical sense as something that decreases or inhibits nerve activity. Okay, on the other side of the scale, you've got stimulants. So, you know, like caffeine, nicotine, amphetamines, crystal meth, whatever. They're things that wake us up and make us feel more alert. Sedatives like alcohol, opium and stuff, they're the things that reduce nerve activity and sort of calm us down. Now, I think a lot of people kind of understand that at a basic level, but where it gets really interesting is where you look at how the human brain reacts to it. Now, it's quite a complicated process. And what I try to do in Alcohol Explained is not to get to grips with the real deep mechanics, but to explain it in terms I understand it in, which is pretty much this. Your brain, the human brain, creates and excretes a huge array of chemicals, drugs and hormones. So stuff you would have heard about like adrenaline and cortisol and dopamine and endorphins. These are all these naturally occurring chemicals that your brain creates and releases. It's a phenomenally complicated process and we humans don't fully understand it. But what we do know is it works by way of something called homeostasis, which is basically a delicate balancing act of all these different chemicals, drugs and hormones. So when you take alcohol, which is a sedative, your brain tries to counter that. It does it in lots of different ways. It releases adrenaline and cortisol, which is a stress hormone. But what it's trying to do is counter the sedating effects of the alcohol. So that's all well and good. But when the alcohol wears off, that overstimulation is left behind. So it's almost like I kind of think of it sometimes. This is how I usually describe it. You know, the old fashioned weighing scales that were like a bar with two baskets hanging off it.
Yeah.
Imagine one of those baskets is stimulants and the other is depressants or sedatives. In its naturally occurring state, there's a little bit on both of them. And it's balanced nicely. So that's you at your best, whatever that might be, at your most confident, happy, resilient, whatever. So you put something on the depressant side of the scale and it tips up. So your brain puts something on the stimulant side of the scale to balance it. But then when the alcohol wears off, it tips the other way. Now, this is what people experience when they wake up. You know, like with anxiety, that anxious feeling you get when you're hungover. It is literally alcohol withdrawal. It's so a lot of people think of alcohol withdrawal as like DTs and seizures, and that's what it is at the very serious end of the scale. But of course, like anything, it doesn't go from nothing to the absolute extreme. There's a sliding scale. And that's basically what it is. So every time you wake up in the night because of your drinking, that's because the stimulants are kicking in and waking you up, even though you might be really tired, you can't get back to sleep. So it's quite interesting when you say to people, do you wake up in the night after drinking alcohol and can't get back to sleep? And they say yes. And you say that's alcohol withdrawal. As I say, a lot of people think of it as the extreme, but the definition of withdrawal is an unpleasant feeling caused by a chemical imbalance that is itself caused by the previous dose of the drug wearing off. And that's basically what it is. And that's almost like the basic level of how alcohol becomes addictive. Because when that unpleasant feeling kicks in, there's two ways you can get rid of it. You can wait a few days for your brain chemistry to get back to normal, or you can take a far quicker route, which is to have another drink.
And that's is that where the comment of a hair of the dog comes
exactly
from, that mentality?
Yeah, exactly, because that's basically rebalancing the scales. Because if you think about it, you're feeling rubbish because your brain's geared up to work under the sedating effects of the alcohol, but there's no alcohol. So the quickest way to redress that balance is to have another drink.
Why is it that when you have alcohol, obviously a lot of people say that it calms them down and mellows them out, but then there's the element of, you said obviously that you get the dose of stimulants to kind of re-energize you. Is it because it's a very periodic journey of like, you'll have points where you'll feel mellow? I'm trying to think of like when I'd last had a drink and I'm like, obviously I've never sat and analysed it.
That's trouble. Yeah.
So is it like, do yeah, is it that obviously normally you'd feel very mellowed out, but then obviously you do get the anxiety, but that tends to come afterwards. Is it very
Yeah.
much like, is it a wave effect?
Yeah, kind of. So I mean, for most of us, when we're drinking, we continue drinking. So,
Yeah.
like, if you start drinking in the evening, you're continually drinking. So, alcohol has a half-life of 5 hours, and what that means is a half-life of a drug is how long it takes to fall to half within your system. So if you drink, I don't know, 10 units, how long does it take before your body metabolizes it down to 5? And that's a 5-hour period with alcohol. So if you're going out in the evening and drinking, you're kind of not quite finishing, but then when you stop, it starts to quite quickly tail off. And that's why that half-life of 5 hours is quite important, because that's usually when people wake up. Because that's usually when the stimulants and balance kind of counteract each other. And it's interesting because if people are obviously listening to this drinking and thinking, oh yeah, I wake up in the night, if you look at the time of your last drink, it's usually approximately 5 hours after that you'll wake up, because that's when those withdrawals are kicking in.
That's really interesting. And I'm guessing that's also what, because the study showed that it really impacts your REM sleep as well. And I'd imagine the stims is what's causing the issue of messing with your REM sleep.
Yeah, that's a fascinating one, because obviously REM sleep is a really interesting part of sleep. And when they attach sensors to people and monitor them in REM sleep, their brain lights up as if it's almost awake. So it's a really weird period of sleep where your brain's really active, but your body's completely gone. So quite often it's useful to think of sleep as almost like a plane going up and down through the different layers of the atmosphere. That at the very highest level, so you're almost conscious, is REM sleep, and right down at the bottom, at the deepest level, is obviously deep sleep. REM sleep is a lot we don't know about it. It's when we dream. It's vital, absolutely vital to mental health and happiness. Because alcohol is a sedative, the more you drink of it, the more difficult your brain finds to get into REM sleep, because it's trying to light up as if it's fully awake, but it's been drowned by this sedative. So when you drink alcohol, your capability for REM sleep absolutely drops massively.
It's also interesting because the other thing I say about sleep is interesting because I personally have different experiences sleep-wise depending on what I've drank. So to give people an example, if I stick to beer, I don't tend to have a problem. If you give me a red wine, it's like giving me a sleeping pill.
Oh, right, okay.
But I have a completely different experience when it comes to what alcohol. So is there anything to say? Obviously, there's the argument of percentages. That's a huge part. But it just seems that the one alcohol that will knock me for 6 when it comes to sleeping is red wine. I don't know what it is.
It might be it might be if you're usually a beer drinker and then you sort of occasionally have a red wine, that obviously it's going to be 2 or 3 times as strong as your average beer. So it might just be that it knocks you, because this is the other very interesting thing. Obviously, we're kind of talking here about tolerance, and everyone's kind of on board with the fact, tolerance, the more you drink, the more you can handle. But not many people stop and think, what's changed in my body that allows me to consume a higher amount of this poison? And the answer is that your brain's becoming increasingly proficient at countering the alcohol. When you first drink alcohol, your body's never encountered it before, so it's really easily overwhelmed. But as you consume it regularly, your brain becomes better and better at countering it. So the knock-on effect of that is you need more to get the same effect, because your brain's been able to counter it a lot quicker. You can drink more, but also the withdrawal gets worse, because don't forget, your brain is becoming oversensitive, almost equal to the amount you're drinking. And as that creeps up, so does the withdrawal, that anxiety. And that's because the more hammered you get, the more anxious and nervous you feel the next day, as your brain's trying to sort of counteract things.
I say I've never even sat and analysed it, because I say that, I mean, it's something I've thought about recently. Is it's very much ingrained, particularly in English culture. Drinking is such a big part of our culture. And when I've
Really is.
spoken to my European, to be fair, the Europeans are quite similar, but when I've spoken to friends that aren't UK based, they're like, I don't get what the obsession is. And it's just very much part of our culture. It's like, oh, we all go to it's even worse for me because I've got a foot in both camps and don't want to annoy anyone, but I'm a quarter Irish and then the rest is English. So both of us are quite,
Yeah.
But it's such a big part of English culture. And I don't know where that I understand where it comes from because it's years and years old, but I always play the analogy of someone said to me the other day, if the invention of alcohol went into Dragon's Den tomorrow, no one would invest. So why the hell do we do it now?
It's mad, isn't it? So a friend of mine, his dad was in entertainment, so setting up huge events for people. And he always used to say the golden rule is for every nationality in the world, apart from the English, Irish, Scots and Welsh, the golden rule is you don't run out of food. He said for the English, Irish, Scots and Welsh, the golden rule is you don't run out of booze. Yeah, and it's just, it really is, absolutely ingrained in our culture.
Because it's something I've battled with recently of like which we'll come on to later, of like reducing alcohol consumption. But when it's so much of our culture, it can become very difficult to start doing that and reducing that level because it's almost, you don't know what to do instead of. And that is changing, but that's something particularly where when I first started drinking, that was very much, college was like, well, what else are you going to do? What else are you going to drink? And it's like, admittedly, there's not a lot of, bars don't really stock the non-alcoholic options very well, but there are other options. It's just interesting that there has been, what have you seen from the research you've done in terms of the shift of more people reducing alcohol consumption?
There's a big generational gap. I mean, the two big things, obviously, it's the generational gap. So the upcoming generation is sort of shying away from alcohol. And there seems to be quite a big sort of feeling that it's old fashioned. And you see it quite a lot in work culture where, companies that are offering, with the package, you get to go out drinking all the time.
Thursday booze trolley.
Yeah, exactly. They're just not really interested. And it's seen as a kind of a really sort of 80s, 90s thing. And people just aren't on board with it. But the other big, huge difference I've seen since publishing Alcohol Explained, which has been around sort of 8 years now, is that the focus has moved now. What the question used to be sort of 8-10 years ago is, am I alcoholic? If the answer is yes, I have to quit drinking completely. If the answer is no, then I just try and sort of cut down a bit and be a bit more sensible with it. But nowadays people are taking a completely different approach and they're saying, what is this actually doing for me? Forget whether I'm relying on it or not relying on it. Am I getting more out of this than I'm putting in? And the answer, obviously, really with alcohol is no, because it really, we've talked about how it ruins you. Even 1 or 2 glasses will spoil your natural sleeping pattern. Biggest reported symptom of a hangover is tiredness. You do not sleep properly when you've even had just 1 or 2 glasses of wine. So you're getting whatever in inverted commas pleasure that night, but then you're writing off the whole of the next day feeling kind of a bit because you haven't slept properly.
Yeah. It's so interesting because we have alcohol, the stereotypical use of alcohol is to unwind and relax. When actually, it's like you say, it's almost, it's having your cake and trying to eat it. It doesn't work because you're just paying for it the next day.
Yeah, it does the opposite. So although it's a drug and it sedates your brain, so mentally you feel more deadened, your body does the opposite because it's releasing cortisol, which, as I say, is a stress hormone, and adrenaline, which is why your heart rate and blood pressure goes up when you drink alcohol. So if you've got a Fitbit or anything, or even if you just take your own blood pressure, take your own pulse rate and have a couple of drinks and see how much it jumps up. And, you think of it, that's the opposite of how it should work because alcohol is a sedative. It should slow everything down. But that's evidence of your body's reaction. So although your brain feels relaxed, your body's done the opposite. It's gone into this massive kind of stress position to try and counter the effects of alcohol, which incidentally is another reason why it makes you feel really heavy and lethargic, because as your blood pressure and heart rate goes up, so you want to sit down and rest. Okay, so this is why exercise is hard. The harder you push yourself, the more you want to sit down and rest. The faster your heart rate is going, the higher your blood pressure, the more your brain tries to slow it down by saying sit, and it makes you feel really heavy.
I suppose
so
it's that it's the classic thing of it's a poison. So your body
Yeah.
goes, we need to get rid of this. Okay, let's do all of these things to try and get rid of it.
Yeah.
And people start, I even admit that I forget it. You go, why is this happening? I'm like, well, of course, you're sitting there essentially drinking poison. When you frame it like that, the whole idea of drinking is crazy.
It is really, yeah, kind of. It's interesting because like here, forgive me because I've sort of been going on probably a lot about the negative effects, but it's as equally interesting to analyse the other side of it, because I'm sure people would be sitting there, and this is what I did for years. It's like, okay, I get all that. It's not particularly good for me. But what's a night out with your mates without a drink? It's fine, but it has to be done. Whereas when you look at kind of the psychology and, again, the physiological effects of socialising, I mentioned endorphins, and obviously for people who don't know, endorphins is something that your brain releases and it makes you feel really good. We get endorphin boost when we're hungry and we eat a healthy meal. We get it massively when we exercise. That's why you feel great when you exercise, if you're sleeping properly and otherwise healthy. We get it when we have sex. We get it when we're socialising. So actually what happens with alcohol is, when people start drinking, they associate alcohol with this wonderful feeling they get, and they blame that on the alcohol. But actually, if you just sit at home on your own with no music, no TV, no nothing, and drink alcohol, it's not a particularly pleasant feeling. You feel a bit deadened, a bit confused, a bit tunnel visioned. You feel weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the endorphin effect of the socialising that actually feels good.
Because the other debate, the other positive debate for alcohol was the social lubricant. For some people, it's a social lubricant of it reduces inhibitions and everything else. So they feel like, for those that are more socially anxious, they're able to open up more, have more conversations, be more involved socially. So it's one of them things of there is anecdotal positives is probably the best way to put it.
Yeah. No, I take your point, but let me give you another point of view on this, right? And obviously I can't talk about your perspective or anyone else's, but I can certainly talk about mine. I always felt very socially anxious and a bit of an introvert, and that was one of my reasons for drinking. And then I thought back to when I was a child, before I used to drink. And then I looked at my own sons, who are now 11 and 13, but as they were growing up, you turn up at a social event and the children are kind of clinging onto your legs and they won't get involved. And a few minutes later, they sort of start to get a bit involved. Half an hour into it, they're going absolutely berserk. That's the natural tendency for anyone at a social function. You turn up, you feel slightly nervous, but you slowly kind of relax into it. That happens whether you drink alcohol or not. Without the alcohol, it might take a bit longer, but you still get there.
It's interesting, I say, because one of the things I've said on the podcast before, the one thing I've always been intrigued by is, for me, for anyone that doesn't know me, I have a very overactive brain in terms of particularly being quite entrepreneurial. I've got a million ideas, a million solutions, and one thing that I've always been surprised by is, if you give me a beer, even my partner says, it's like someone drops the penny. You're like, you suddenly go, I know what I'm doing now. And I still, to this day, no matter how many people with experience I speak to, I can't work out why that happens. My brain goes, I know the solution now. And for some reason, and it's the worst thing, because whenever I say this, people think I'm dependent on it. No, I'm just aware. I'm aware of it. It's just a weird phenomenon that I'm like, I don't understand it.
I don't know. It does alter how your brain works. So maybe the solution is kind of there and you can't quite get it out, and something in there with the alcohol just, I don't know.
It's so strange. It's so strange. Weird. Yeah. I mean, talking away from me, I wanted to get into a bit more of like your experience with alcohol in terms of so you noticed that you started to have a problem. What was that journey like in terms of, once you noticed, okay, something's got to change? What was the journey like of making that change? Because I think for anyone struggling with addiction, or even just considering dropping alcohol, it's quite, as we said, because it's such a societal thing, it's a very difficult thing to do.
It is very hard. And one of the big problems with, as I said, it's a sedative. So it anesthetizes things. So it becomes a very easy primary method of stress relief, because you have a bad day, you're upset, you have an argument with your partner or whatever it is. So you have a drink to calm things down. And it becomes, the more you do that, the more ingrained it becomes. So you try and give up, but then life carries on throwing curveballs at you and you haven't got your stress relief. So it's incredibly difficult. But going back to your original question about what the journey was like, for me, and I think a lot of people, the bulk of the journey is being in denial or not quite knowing whether it's a problem or not. Because you're waking up feeling awful and you drank too much, but like for me, for example, so I wouldn't drink during the week. And to me, it seemed illogical because I can go a few days without drinking. So I can't have an alcohol problem because look at, for example, people who are addicted to nicotine. They smoke all day, every day. I don't get up. I did get up at the weekend in the morning and drink, but then I would maybe ring in sick on Monday, but back to work Tuesday, Wednesday, start to feel better on Thursday, Friday. So for me, it was a lot of kind of puzzling it out. It's like, how is this working? Because I'm all right quitting. And this is the interesting thing, because what you have in mind is, if I can quit, I must be able to moderate, because it must be, you know, if you're drinking a dozen beers on a Friday night, the mind says to you, well, if I'm going to stop drinking, I've got to resist a dozen beers. Whereas if I just cut down, I only have to resist 9 beers and then I can drink the other 3. Yeah. So it becomes this, you almost become obsessed with moderating. And the more, this is what I say to people, there's always people out there drinking more than you. So it's always easy to look around and think, you know what, I don't have a problem because he or she drinks as much or more. But the problem is there's always people who drink less than you. So there'll always be people who are looking at you thinking you're drinking too much. So you're just in this kind of spectrum. And for me, I think a big step towards quitting was to just forget about the whole dependency thing, because it was just clouding it. It was to go back to a really basic question. Is this doing me any favours? I know there's a downside, but there's also, to my mind, there's a good side. Yeah. Do they balance out? Is it worth it? So I think getting through that thing was a major one. For me, understanding why moderation was no longer an option was really powerful for me as well, because when people start to think they might have a problem with alcohol, it's because they drink a lot. And the reason they drink a lot is because they enjoy it. And if you enjoy something, you don't want to give it up. Yeah, so that situation, it's almost like a perfect storm, because if you're only sort of mildly drinking or not drinking too much and you think, oh, I'm not really addicted, so I can carry on. But the worse it gets, almost like the harder it gets at the same time, because you're getting increasingly addicted to it.
It's really tricky, I think, because, well, the whole thing is, as you say, it's that all or nothing culture, because automatically you get enticed into temptation of, it's just one beer. It's just, it'll be all right. Like, but then I know myself, I don't think I've got a problem, but that's probably something that a lot of people say. I've even said, like, one of my things I've known about myself is I don't do well with the whole, I'll just have one. That is like, that doesn't work with me. And I've realized it very early on. So my rule is no drinking on Sunday. Like, it's Fridays and Saturdays. Yeah. And it's one or two then. But that's another thing as well. It's like, you go, if you're that type of person, it's all or nothing. And I am very much that type of person with most of the things I do. You have to be very aware of that as well. And you go, oh, okay, I need to be aware of that and how that impacts everything. Yeah. And then, it's a really tricky one, because obviously there's no, for those that want to drink, there's no, and it isn't a problem. There's no problem. There's no right way to phrase that. I mean, alcohol isn't a bad thing, but you can't stop people doing it. It's like smoking is a bad thing, but it's going to be something that people do.
Yeah, it's around forever. That point you were making about sort of all or nothing's quite an interesting one, because for me, that was one of the things to get to grips with this really helped me in stopping, because I kind of mentioned earlier how the withdrawal kicks in. So at a really basic level, you have an alcoholic drink and it wears off, leaving an unpleasant feeling. The quickest way to get rid of that unpleasant feeling is to have another alcoholic drink. But when we start drinking, we don't know that. So we have a drink, probably not many because we can't take that many, and it wears off and you've got that kind of slightly unrelaxed feeling. But there's lots of reasons in life why we might feel slightly stressed or slightly unrelaxed. And all we do most of the time is we get on with things. So you drink the alcohol, it wears off, leaving this unpleasant feeling. You're not even consciously aware of it. So you just don't drink for a bit, and then you go back and have another one, and it sort of does the same thing. But the problem is that over the years, as you're drinking on more and more occasions and more drinks, your subconscious brain starts to learn that this particular unpleasant feeling can be alleviated by having another drink. Now, when you reach that stage, it's inherently difficult to moderate or have a, inverted commas, sensible relationship with alcohol, because every drink, as it wears off, creates a desire for the next one.
Yeah.
And this is getting this key kind of thing in my mind was how I defeated that mislogic of saying, well, it must be easier to just drink 3 beers than none. It's easier to have none because you haven't got that physiological thing going on inside you that's triggering the thought of the next drink. Now, the problem with that underlying psychological subconscious learning process is what's learnt cannot be unlearned. Okay, so look, you're a sensible chap. Imagine you've never come across the concept of mathematics before. Okay, I could teach you 1, 2, 3, 4, and I could teach you why 2 + 2 is 4, right? I could teach you that, but I could never unteach it. Once you've got that in your mind, it's there forever because it's a fact and it's true. Now, the problem with, like I say, drinking alcohol, and indeed this applies to any addiction, when your subconscious makes the link between the unpleasant feeling that wears off when one dose starts to wear off and having another dose to get rid of it, you can never go back to it. It's why, you know, when I started smoking, and this is true for a lot of people who smoked, I only smoked at weekends to begin with, and it gradually built up and up and up. And when I was smoking all the time, I could never get back to just smoking at weekends. And again, it's because my brain had linked onto the fact that every time I put a cigarette out, that unpleasant feeling would start growing and growing and growing. And the only way to get rid of it was to have another cigarette.
It's really interesting. One thing you said earlier, I want to come on to, which is obviously you said that a lot of people, and me included, you get that whole, oh, you've had a really crappy day at work, you've had a stressful time with your partner or whatever it is, and a lot of people turn to drink. What have you done what is your alternative? What do you do now instead of that? What is your release? Because I think that's the other thing is people, they always, and me included, always look to replace one thing with another thing. So then they filled the hole. So what have you done to do that?
So this is a really important point, and this is what I say to people who are thinking about stopping. It kind of goes back to what I said before about being a sedative, so it very quickly becomes a coping mechanism, is you need to consciously think about what coping mechanisms you will use, because it's very easy, like you say, to almost play whack-a-mole with it. So you give up drinking and your smoking increases, and you give up smoking and you suddenly start finding you're going down boots by codeine all the time or whatever it is, because you're getting stressed, you're getting unhappy, and it's like, what can I consume to change how I feel? And that's really what it is. With drinking, we get conditioned to consuming something to change how we feel. So when you quit, it's natural to reach for the next thing to consume. And consuming something to change how you feel is kind of inherently problematic. So it's a really personal thing, this. I exercise. Like, as I say, when you exercise, you get that endorphin buzz, you really feel good. And I do that. I run a couple of times a week and I go to the gym at lunchtime at work. I love reading. So at the end of the day, I quite often just sit and read a book or something and lose myself in a book or a film or like a Netflix series, whatever it is. But choose it now, because from my experience, when you quit drinking, your life does become a lot better. You've got more energy, you're sleeping better, you just feel more confident and resilient. But everyone has bad days. So bad days will come. Yeah. And what you don't want to do is sort of the bad day comes and you think, oh, that's okay, I'll just have a drink to, oh, I can't drink anymore. And you're kind of in that situation of I feel rubbish. What do I do about it?
Because the other thing is, like we said earlier, is that whole thing, it's a big part of English culture. So how have you managed? See, the one solution a lot of people will give is change your circle. So don't hang around with people that is their entertainment as they go to the pub for a drink. How have you managed that with like friends and social interactions? Because it is so much of UK culture of, oh,
Yeah.
well, we're going to have a party or we're going to go to have a barbecue. Everyone's going to have a few drinks. It's very much anything. It's horrible because a friend mentioned it a few years ago. Like everything we do revolves around drinking.
Yeah, it really does, doesn't it? Yeah. I'm not a big believer in changing your friend circle. I think if you, and it may sound kind of difficult, but for me, because I have a completely different concept of alcohol now, a different perception of it, I just don't want it anymore. So I don't find I have to need to avoid it. So I go and see friends in the pub. What I do find is, whereas when I was drinking, we'd stay in the pub till 11, then we'd go to a restaurant or a nightclub and find somewhere to keep drinking. I kind of knock off a bit earlier than that now, because what I find is good social interaction is about a meeting of minds, right? Yeah. When someone's taking a drug, you're kind of, you're being on a sort of a similar mental state, starts to shift. It's incredibly annoying being sober and everyone's pissed because it's just, they're just really irritating. I kind of find that with the best will in the world, they are. And obviously I'm not judging people on this because I was exactly the same when I was drinking. Yeah. But so I generally find I leave a bit earlier. I don't stay around to the bitter end because I think that's a mistake. The other mistake is don't try and match people pint for pint if you're on non-alcoholic drinks, because you don't need it and you'll start to feel really sick. You just...
You'll also, I mean, this goes for drinking as well, but you'll also forever be going to the toilet as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's your opinion on, because a lot of people now, me included as well on this one, are turning to zero alcohol, because one thing that I've found with it is whenever I've done stints with not drinking, that's been a great thing for me to use, of like, it's almost tricking my brain of like, I'm still included in this social interaction because it's not a Coke.
That's a totally good point. I mean, I like alcohol-free beers. I like the taste of beer. I always have done. And I'm quite into alcohol-free beers. I think as long as you treat them the right way, because I think if you're saying to yourself, right, I can't have alcohol anymore, I'll just guzzle loads of alcohol-free beer and hopefully get some kind of buzz out of it. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, it doesn't.
You need to think of it as it's one of many soft drinks, and you might want one or two of the during the evening. You're not going to probably want to drink 8 pints of them, but they're there as options. So I think as long as you're not trying to somehow have it replace alcohol and give you something that it's not going to give you, I'm actually, I think it's great. And as you say, it's useful to be in that situation because you can all go to the bar, you can all order something, you're doing virtually everything else that all your mates are doing. The only minor difference is your drink doesn't have alcohol in it, that drug in it.
Yeah, because one of the big benefits I found was, it sounds stupid, but I was able to stay on zero beers and then just drive home. Yeah, and usually great, you'd be like,
50 quid.
Oh, wait, I've got to get a cab.
Yeah, fantastic.
It's so interesting. But then I think there's particularly like as I say, grew up in a Irish English with quite a very heavy drinking culture. So even now, it's taken some time to bring them round to. It's not weird if I order a zero beer, but I still get stuff for it. But I'm like, it is what it is.
I think you'll always get, particularly if you're with mates you used to drink with, you'll always get a bit of stick for it.
Yeah.
But, I mean, to me, it's just, if it wasn't that, it'll be something else you're getting stick for anyway. If you're with
exactly.
your mates.
Exactly. Yeah. It's as I say, for me, once I had the realization of it's so that I'm included in the, like say, you go through the routine, everything, it's all the same. It's just that one minor change. I felt a lot better for it, rather than, as I say, I would come back to, there's only so much Coke you can drink. You get to a point you're like,
really sick to it.
Yeah, I'm all right. And then you sit there going, what else do I want? That was the other game I always play. It's like, what else do I want? I don't know.
You can't physically drink that much liquid. We're not designed to. It's not good for us. So that's what I'm saying. Don't try and match people drink for drink. Just, get your bottle of beer or whatever it is and just, don't try and keep up with the rounds.
What advice would you give to someone who's struggling with alcohol or dependency and is probably on the beginning of their journey?
I would advise them to get curious, because that's what I did, and try and understand it, because I think it's very difficult with something like this because when we drink it, we feel good. And when it wears off, we feel like everything's too much and really difficult. We start to feel like the problem's with us because I'm not right unless I have a drink. But when you start to get curious and start to understand, no, that's not it. I'm fine. The reason I've got this problem is because I've been consuming this addictive substance for however many years. I think that lifts a lot of the guilt, and it just gives you a bit of self-confidence because it's like, you know what, there's nothing wrong with me other than I grew up in a culture that encouraged heavy drinking and I went along with it. And, you know, I've been taking an addictive drug for 15, 25 years. Surprise, surprise, I'm now addicted to it. And I'm stuck in that cycle.
Yeah, when you frame it like that, you wouldn't say to any coke addict, oh yeah, no, it's so weird that you're addicted to, well, it's addictive substance. Of course you're going to...
Yeah, like a heavy smoker or something. So I think that kind of alleviates a lot of the worry. And what I would say is as well, it's really hard to believe it when you're in the middle of it, but you feel so much better when you stop because you're not messing with your brain chemistry. You go back to getting good quality sleep. Your heart rate and blood pressure drops down, which makes you feel more confident and more alert and just better. It takes a few days to get there from the physiological perspective, and then it can take weeks, months, whatever, just from that adjustment thing. Because we've been talking about, you know, what do I do if an evening? I go out with my mates and get drunk. That's not what you're going to do anymore. So there's a lot of changing stuff, but change isn't always comfortable, but change can often be for the better. And that's something else I would say to people is don't think I've given up drinking now, day one, this is awful. It gets better and better and better. And although you will go on that dip as you go through with the withdrawal, you find you're not sleeping or you're sleeping all the time or whatever it might be, when you come out the other side, you'll feel better than you ever did when you were drinking. Even when you're having that first really enjoyable drink of the day at a social function or whatever it is, you will feel better than that all the time, because at the end of the day, there's no better feeling than just having a healthy body and mind, just letting your brain chemistry do what it's supposed to do and letting your body, you know, your heart rate and your blood pressure be low so that you feel confident and a bit more. Yeah.
And I can speak to that as well, in terms of, obviously I still drink now, but I did 8 or so weeks before my sister's wedding of zero drinking, and I've never felt so like on the ball than I did then. And it's a weird one. It wasn't something I expected, because I was like you say, I almost did the whole thing of, it'll only be 5 days and then it's out of my system, blah, blah, blah. Didn't even think about the additional effects that would happen when you go past that. You go, okay, this is quite cool.
Yeah. It's amazing. And that's what I say to a lot of people. It's hard, but you've got to trust the system. You've got to believe. And that's why I think the message I'm trying to explain to people about how all this, you know, this chemical and physiological reactions are going on, because I think it can help people understand, yes, I will feel better. I'm not just going to quit and feel awful for the rest of my life. There is a period of feeling worse, absolutely, for a few days, but there's hope at the end of the tunnel. So I'm just going to, you know, grit my teeth and just keep going for a few days. And then it just, like you've said, it just gets better and better and better. And at the end of it, you're looking around thinking, God, why was I doing that for the last however many years?
Yeah. What would you say? Would you say for someone that is obviously on the beginning of their journey, though, would you say to taper off their drinking, or would you say, right, just knock it on the head?
So I personally found it easier to just stop, because when I got that thing in my mind that having a drink, so say I'm sat here in the pub with my mates and I really want to drink, right, for whatever reason. If I have a drink and I drink the drink, it's then gone. And I'm still out with my mates, so I'll still want another drink. But actually, as the drink wears off, I've then got that physiological desire for another drink anyway, that reaction that's happening within me. So I found it much easier to just quit. And I think the problem is with like tapering or moderating, if you say to yourself, I'm not drinking again and that's it, you've made a decision and it's done. If you're going to say to yourself, I only drink on certain occasions, or on this occasion, or I'll cut down, or whatever, you're constantly stuck in that thought process of should I, shouldn't I, should I, shouldn't I? And it's for me, it was harder to do that than just to make one single decision. I'm done and I'm not going to drink again.
Yeah. I can completely understand that. And as you say, it's that whole thing of you always then leave yourself sort of open to it as well.
Yeah,
You,
yeah, that's the thing.
you give
Yeah,
yourself, it's like a silly little brain trick of like you giving yourself the option, the out of like, oh, I can drink sometimes.
yeah,
And then
exactly.
your
Yeah,
brain goes, oh, well, we can do that all the time.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
it's interesting. Would you say, obviously, we're seeing a big shift over to people being over to sobriety? Would you? It's a bit of an extreme question, but would you say that we should just get rid of alcohol?
I don't think you can get rid of it because, prohibition in America showed us you can't just get rid of it, because if you ban something most of the population want to consume, they just go underground and it all gets, that has other knock-on consequences. For me, it's about individual choice. Okay. It's absolutely about individual choice, but you can't make a good decision unless you have all the facts. Okay, so for
Yeah,
example, I spoke about how alcohol interferes with our sleep. A lot of people don't or wouldn't have appreciated that. So they're making a decision to drink, not factoring in the very important fact that it's going to ruin their sleeping pattern, even if they just have one or two. And I mentioned, and I hope this will be new information for a lot of people, about how it puts up your heart rate and blood pressure, which robs you of
yeah,
energy and makes you feel heavy and lethargic. And again, a lot of people will be thinking, oh, I'll have a drink, not factoring that in. So for me, it would be less about banning alcohol and more about just educating people. And that's
yeah,
really what Alcohol Explained is. It's just a book that says, here's all the information. What you do with that is up to you. You can cut
yeah.
back, you can drink the same, you can drink more. But here's the information you need in order to make a decent decision.
Yeah, it's interesting because, as you say, it's that I think at the end of the day, adults will do what adults do. As you
Yeah,
said,
yeah.
prohibition proved it. But do you think do you think there's a better place we should be heading towards? So for me, I always think, because I don't care if my friends drink or not, I'm not going to be that person being like, "Why are you not drinking?" But is there somewhere better we could be as a society in terms of, obviously we are becoming more accepting, particularly I think even the generation after me is
Mm-hmm.
more prone to not drinking than drinking. But do you
Yeah.
think there's a better position for the society to be in?
Yeah, I think the ideal position would be for people to be living their lives without, like I said before, looking to consume stuff to change how they feel.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a massive emphasis on these days of like, I don't feel right, I'll get a pill or a drink or a something, something that just changes how I feel. And I think that would be the thing to get away from, and just to think to ourselves, like I said before, we're all different. We all have different mental health issues and all the rest of it. But generally speaking, alcohol, the other illegal substances, overall, they have a massive detrimental effect. Although they appear to make you feel better in the very short term, they have this massive detrimental effect in the long term.
Do you think, although, because one thing I would come back to is like when what we've just spoke about is that alcohol is often used when someone's not feeling right. So they're stressed, they're depressed, they're this, they're that, the other. Do you think there's more society can do to sort of alleviate some of that? Like, because one of the things I always think of is, particularly with hustle culture, some of the high pressure jobs in London and things like that, the reliance on alcohol develops there because it's like you're like, at 110 every day, extremely anxious. So you get home and you go, do you know what? I need something to take the edge off.
Yeah.
How do we fix that? Because that's something even to this day, I sit there and go, I always come back to the same analogy that loads of people have said of like, we spend more time at work than we do at home. Why are we stressing about it? Like, at the end of the day, mistakes happen, things go wrong. Like, it's no matter whether you stress about it or not, it's going to happen. And I know that's a really idealistic thing. I'm saying this and I'm a stress head. So don't get me wrong. I know I'm playing devil's advocate, but how do we better position society so that we don't have to be so dependent on taking pills, using alcohol, and still seeking that relief from something else?
Yeah, so There's a few things to say here. One of them's about stress. So a lot of people, that situation you just described is stressful, but a lot of people thrive on stress. It's all about the individual and how much pressure feels right to motivate you before it trips over into this is too much and it's turning into too much for me.
Yeah.
So I think that's more about people being in the right role where they're being pushed enough to bring out their best, but not pushed too much to really make them feel stressed, or not being pushed enough. So if you have someone who's comfortable in a real high pressure job and have them, sweeping the streets, they'd be going out of their mind because they need that additional pressure.
For sure.
So I think it's about finding that right balance and that right job and being in the one that's correct for you. And I think this is another of the problems we have is we kind of, a lot of the time with alcohol, we might not be happy in our life for whatever reason. It might be a job, it might be a partner, it might be whatever it is. So we just have a few drinks and put it to the back of our mind, and that's how we cope with it. Whereas if we took alcohol out of the equation, we'd have nothing. On the one hand, it might sound bad. We've got nothing to sort of cushion us against it. But on the other hand, without that, we'd probably do something about it because it wants to sit in that situation forever. So people will stay in relationships, jobs that aren't right for them purely because they're able to drink at the end of the day and block their mind to it. Whereas if they removed alcohol from the equation, they'd actually more likely get to grips with what the actual problem is. I'm with the wrong person or in the wrong job and I need to go and change it.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that whole point of someone using it as like not an excuse wrong word, but like a crux to like, I can manage this if I can just keep drinking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and the worst thing is, I've seen it with friends. I've been in a situation myself, and it's something you don't think about. You go, oh no, we just do it. Like you just stiff up it's that British thing again. We're coming back to the British. Stiff up a lip and just get on with it. So you just have a beer and crack on.
Have a drink and forget about it. Yeah, absolutely. But
it's so much of like our society and our makeup. I say with us, and I know it's generalising. Not every Brit is a big drinker, but it is very much in our culture. And again, in the Irish culture, Scottish culture, we've got everything. Just have a drink, you'll be all right.
Yeah. Crazy.
It's mad. Like, and then actually, the other thing I was going to bring on, we talked about education in terms of educating people so that they just have all the facts. Do you think we should be doing more in schools talking about alcohol?
I think so. Yeah, I know they do talk about alcohol and drugs in schools, but I'm not sure they've quite got to grips with it enough from not to want to blow my own trumpet, but to explain it in like simple black and white terms so that kids can understand it.
Yeah.
The stuff, because my kids are 11 and 13 now, so they've got lessons and bits and pieces on it at school, and it from what they tell me, it sounds incredibly vague and kind of maybe wishy-washy is not quite the right word, but that I don't think they're getting the right information out there. I think people, like I said, for me, the ideal is to educate people and then to let them make their own decisions. But you have to make sure that information is with them, and it needs to be with people at basically a young age as possible. Like I say, I was drinking at 14, which at the time seemed normal. That's when all my mates started drinking. But my eldest son now is 13, and then I think, God, at a year's time he would be drinking and smoking. That's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, it's super interesting. I had a really interesting conversation once with my parents, because we were chatting about alcohol, and we were chatting about friends and how some of our friendship circles were it was like they take it to the extreme. And one of the big things Mum said to me was, we introduced you to alcohol earlier, but within our environment, because then you kind of learnt what happened and what it did. And also the bit that shocks me, and it still stuck with me to today, was the thing is, if you hold something away from particularly a teenager, and then they suddenly get hold of it without your permission, they're going to go absolutely batshit with it. Whereas if we can control it and we show you it and go, look, this is what it does, and this is how what happens, we can control how much you have, and also you then don't feel deprived. And I know that's the wrong thing to say, because we've just spoken about the detrimental impact of alcohol, but it was such an interesting thing of actually, it made a lot of sense. I was like,
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense, because I'd see kids when I was in school, they'd be like, oh, I'm going to go out and drink an entire bottle of vodka. And I'm sat there going, why would you want to do that?
Yeah,
Like, that's just a stupid idea.
Yeah. I mean, for me, so like talking about my kids, and I know they're going to grow up and they're going to make their own decisions, fine. The one thing I'm grateful for is I stopped drinking before they were little, so they would never remember me drinking. And I think for me, it's not necessarily about me telling them what to do. You can't do this, you can't do that. But what I hope I've done is shown them you can be an adult and enjoy yourself without alcohol. Because, for example, we just went on holiday and had a absolutely fantastic time. We were running around going berserk and playing, and I didn't drink the whole time, obviously. Yeah. So for me, I think they will go off and do their own decisions, make their own mistakes. Hopefully they won't come a cropper with alcohol, but at least if they do, I won't think, was I setting the wrong role model for them by drinking loads and showing them that this is what adults do. We drink lots. So
is it interesting? Because then also I would play that of like, if anyone's best positioned to help their kid through that, it's you. You've been through it and done got the t-shirt. But yeah, no, it's a really interesting thing, because the other more anecdotal thing that people always forget of alcohol is it's really expensive. And
it really is.
Yeah, and then you sit there like. And I can imagine something like going on holiday. If you're going on holiday and it's not an all-inclusive and it's a general holiday, you must save a fortune.
Do you know, funny enough, we always go all-inclusive, but I just don't drink alcohol. Yeah. Funny enough, most places these days have an alcohol-free version available anyway.
Oh, that's cool.
And they've all got like mocktails and stuff, but it's
interesting. Coming back to your book, I was just intrigued because obviously it's done really, really well, and I wondered if any of your readers had shared the impacts it had, or the stories that came from it. I just wondered if you'd had any of that.
Yeah, I get quite a lot. I've got I think I shared my email address in the book, and I've got a website where people can contact me, and I get a lot of people reaching out saying, like, thank you, and different stories. And it's really quite humbling because you get people from all over the world, and it's kind of interesting. Like, some particularly stick in your mind, but there was someone from America who said she sat down and wherever it was at like dawn, like really just completely and utterly at wit's end with a copy of the book, and like quit very successfully. And it kind of, it's a weird thing to think of me kind of sat here in West London tapping away, and suddenly these words are kind of like all over the world and hopefully helping people. So it's a really nice feeling.
It's so interesting because it's one of those things that you just talk on your lived experiences. Like when I talk about disability, and you just think, I'm just helping your average Joe. And when something like that happens and you help, all of a sudden it helps others people, you're like, wow, I didn't that wasn't the plan.
No, it's a really nice feeling, isn't it? Yeah, it's like, wow, that worked out nicely. Yeah.
Has there been any like stories that you've had from readers that really, really shocked you?
What, as in the level they were drinking at? Or?
No, more like the story, because I would imagine that you've had some really amazing stories of people battling with alcoholism. I was just wondering, is there any stories that really stick with you?
One of the worst ones, and I think this kind of goes to a slightly different topic. So I was ex-4 para. So this was quite a few, like 20 odd years ago now. So I kind of got quite an affinity with people with a military background, and it was someone who wrote to me and said her boyfriend, she was in America, was in the military, and he'd been blown up in Iraq or Afghanistan or something, and he'd been put on morphine as a painkiller and become addicted to morphine and ended up killing himself. And she was trying to understand what he'd been through. And quite a few people read Alcohol Explained, although it's about alcohol, obviously it's generically about addiction more generally. And she was saying that kind of helped her understand what he'd gone through and how. Wow. So it's not a particularly happy story, but it always stuck with me, one, because of the military aspect, but two, because it hopefully helped her to get a bit of closure, understanding. And I've had, like I say, a few people write to me and say, I've not got a problem with alcohol, but my father, husband, daughter, whatever, either is trying to quit or they drank themselves to death or whatever. And I didn't understand. And the books helped me understand why and what happened to them.
It's amazing. Like, as I say, it's like those little anecdotal stories that you sit there and think, I didn't expect it to impact that person like that.
Yeah.
But it can go loads of different ways, and it can really surprise you. I mean, we didn't even touch on your military career, and I was going to mention that obviously that must have had a huge impact on, because again, that's another area where drinking is quite a big culture.
Yeah.
I mean,
really
some of the army boys I know, like, some of the stuff they do, you're like,
it's crazy.
You're a different breed, you lot.
Yeah, I know. It was really done as like a hard drinking culture. And I remember one time we were in barracks and we were doing we'd been stood down for the evening. So it was like, I don't know, like 5, 6 in the evening or something.
Yeah.
And we had a march and shoot the next day. So we were up at like 4 in the morning, and then it's a 10-mile march in full kit and then a shooting competition at the end. And it was like, right, everyone's going out drinking. And I was like, I'm just going to stay in, because we got this march and shoot in the morning.
Yeah.
And my sergeant major blew up at me. He was like, you fucking call yourself a paratrooper? You shouldn't be in the reg if you can't go out drinking till 4 in the morning and then go and do a march and shoot. You should fuck off. It was like really pushing you to just go out and get hammered. And then, it's crazy. Some people sort of say it's changed a bit, the culture now.
Yeah.
But I don't know, because I sort of hear other stories that sounds much the same to me.
It's such a strange thing, because I just come back to, it's hard because then everyone goes, bloody Civvy Street. And then you see the thinking, but then I'm like, why is that necessary to be that? Obviously, Army's notoriously hard. It can be very intense, but particularly with stuff like that, it's like, if I don't want to drink, I don't want to drink.
It makes it harder. It's like, why would I do it hungover? I'm struggling to do it normal, let alone do it with a stinking hangover. Jeez.
It's mad that is still the culture, and it's interesting that as you say, your sergeant went down that hard about it, because it's, as I say, you would have thought if anyone needs to be on top form, it's your army boys, really.
I know, getting up like hungover and still drunk from the night before. It's crazy. Yeah,
it's mad. I mean, that must have also. Do you think that had an impact on you going through alcoholism?
Yeah, it absolutely did. It's not to blame the army, because I went in the army looking for a challenge and like we were talking about before, looking for that pressure and looking to do something different and more dangerous and harder and better, etc., etc. And it was down, I asked for that and I got it in spades. Yeah. And then it was my decision to deal with it by drinking, whereas I could have used other stress relief methods that we've already discussed. But because I was using alcohol to deal with that, absolutely, that service, and particularly my tour in Iraq, ramped on my drinking massively. That's how I started morning drinking and drinking through the night and everything. It was that down period, because when we went out to Iraq, I think we had something like 2 months of build-up training, and then we had 2 months of decompression leave at the end. But the 2 months build-up training, you'd go here for like a live firing thing for 3 days, and then you'd have a week off, and it was interspersed with kind of periods of leave where you go home and spend time with your friends and family. And I was basically drinking the whole time I was there. I'd wake up in the morning and make half a cup of coffee and top it up with vodka, because I'm kind of like really nervous about going, and then having a drink like that in the morning kind of calms you down, makes you feel better. But I mean, it's the one thing I could never, drinking in the morning, I could never wrap my head around it. It's I know that's a different story, but it's like when you do the classic, we've got the 4 a.m. fly out, do you want a beer? No, I want a coffee, leave me alone. Straight to the Weatherspoons in Gatwick.
It's honestly, I don't know why that's so culture, but I mean, I don't know. I always think with the drinking in the morning when you're at that point, it sounds like a really naive comment, but the idea of putting vodka in your coffee is like, that doesn't even go together. It wasn't that I was after a nice tasting drink. It was literally like I was waking up feeling terrified and just needing to get a drink inside me to feel okay. And at the time I was putting it down to, it's the stress of knowing I'm going out to Iraq. This is quite a big thing, and I'm nervous about it, and I'm all right doing this. It's just until I get out there, get back safe and sound, hopefully, and then I'll be all right again. What I didn't realise is that with all addiction and with drinking, you can't backtrack.
You can go down the road, you can stop, but it's incredibly hard to backtrack.
Yeah. I mean, I added that a bit on as a weird anecdote, but it was more, I say, it's something I've always thought of, like to me, obviously, as someone that hasn't been on that journey, I always think that would be a massive red flag for me. If I started putting vodka in my coffee, I'd be like,
It's a weird one, but don't forget, so my mindset there isn't I'm doing this for the rest of my life. It's like I've got a few days here and there before I go out to, and Iraq was dry at the time, so they wouldn't give any alcohol to British forces. So in my mind, on the one hand, you're right, so I shouldn't be drinking vodka at 6 a.m, but I didn't used to before I knew I was going out to Iraq. It's just because I got this very particular, unusual stress situation. Yeah. And when I get out there, I'll have 6 months of not drinking because there's no booze out there. And that will be a fine reset anyway. And then I'll come back and I won't have that pressure, so I won't have the need to drink.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So it was,
It's a really naive comment. I've always wondered
It's a very good point. But this is, again, almost like with addiction. We have in mind this would be a red flag for me, or this would be a red flag for me. Or, if I suddenly found myself smoking 40 a day instead of 20 a day, I'd think, I've got a real serious issue here.
Yeah.
But the goalposts are constantly shifting. There's always a reason for it. So the deeper you go in, there's always, it's happening for this reason, and it's that, and it's that. So there's always a way of kind of shifting it and seeing it as a slightly different perspective.
The other thing, just as a last closing one, because it's just suddenly popped into my head, that's another big time when drinking into big cultures, is the festive period. I mean, we're now recording in end of September, which it will soon start flying around the word Christmas. How have you found that journey, being sober and travel through that? Because I say, again, coming from quite a drinking culture family, it's very much a big part of the festivities. How have you it sounds bad. How have you navigated that? You shouldn't have to navigate it. You just go about it and don't drink.
No, I'm the same as you. So I come from like quite a heavy drinking family as well. And Christmas was always about like us all getting together and getting hammered.
Yeah.
But for me, it's every situation is different without alcohol, right? Whether you're talking about going on holiday or you're talking about Christmas, it's different, but it can be better if you do it in the right way. Yeah. So like Christmas for me now, I try and get up early and go for a run because then I feel really good all day. And if the other thing we do, we tend to romanticize stuff in the past. We tend to look back on things and think they were a lot better than they were. So it's easy to think about Christmas and what a good laugh it is and all the rest of it. The reality for me, Christmases were getting drunk in the morning, having lunch, and then falling asleep all afternoon on the sofa.
Yeah.
And then waking up feeling rubbish in the evening. So it was like, actually, you know what? It's quite nice to feel good and lively all day long, rather than just kind of like slightly sedated and not so well in the morning and then just sleep and feeling rubbish for the rest of the day.
So you don't get the food coma then?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's an interesting one. I'd say it's a big part of, as we've said several times, it's a big part of English culture. So it's interesting. I say it's great that you've managed to replace it fully with exercise. And also something I found when I did not drink is it's so much easier to exercise, because I think whenever you have that constant game of, I'm not really feeling up to it, you didn't really have that, because you feel a lot more like, okay, I can do this.
That's the knock-on effect it has. The two biggest things for me, because I'm sleeping properly and because my heart rate and blood pressure are low, you feel like you want to exercise. It's not a question of, oh God, I've got to go to the gym, I've got to go for a run, and I really don't want to go. When you stop drinking for a bit and you get back to normal, humans are not designed to be sedentary. We're supposed to be moving around loads. Yeah. And it's only these drugs that we take that allow us to sit around all day. If you get back to feeling like healthy and good, you want to go out and exercise. Yeah. And it's a nice feeling to actually have excess energy and want to go and do stuff.
It's so true. And then I think as well, it's that whole thing we've said several times. It has so many knock-on effects of so many things that you go, oh, that's better. That makes sense. Because as I say, I think one thing I've learned recently is how much sleep is really important. But then also alcohol and sleep don't go together, despite popular opinion.
Yeah. I would say to people, if you take nothing away from this, don't be fooled into thinking that alcohol-induced unconsciousness is sleep, because they're two very different things. If you drink and you fall unconscious, that is not sleep. You're not going through the restorative sleep cycles you need to go through in order to wake up feeling good in the morning.
So important, so important. And I think it's something I've realised not recently, but fairly recently, that, as I say, it has such a big impact on sleep. So yeah, definitely agree there. But lastly, just before we finish, because I'm very conscious that I've kept you for quite a while, is the last question that I ask every guest, which is, what's one piece of politically correctness that you really strongly agree with or disagree with?
Oh my God. I'm struggling with this one. I'm trying to think of whether to go serious or not. I think
you can do two. If you got two in mind, you can go do both.
I think political correctness, I think the problem is with it, people take it to extremes or pretend to take it to extremes too much to kind of make it out to be stupid.
Yeah.
So do you know what? I'm going to go with a not so sensible one. And I'm going to say about Marmite, and I think it's fantastic. And I don't agree with anyone who dislikes it.
I'm in the camp there. I love a bit of Marmite myself. I mean, so much so that my old dog was called Marmite.
Oh, well, okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Nice.
It's a weird one. I say funny enough, this links quite well. One of the notorious things that my dad often does is he'll come home from drinking and he'll make Marmite on toast, but gets it absolutely everywhere. It's on the light switches. It's everywhere.
But that actually, Marmite's a good one for this particular episode. Because you know it's a byproduct of the beer. That's how it came about. It's all to do with the leftovers from the yeast, and it was this product. So they just slapped a load of salt on it and started selling it. But it came about because of the amount of beer we drink in Britain.
Yeah, that's why Dad always has it when he comes in from drinking.
Yeah, bit more yeast product to top it off.
Strange one, but no, I'm with you there. Marmite, there's nothing better than Marmite on toast, but very specifically, it has to be slightly anemic toast. That's my overall.
Fair enough. I slather it on quite thick as well, to be honest. I put it in soup as well. I really like it in soup.
That's a good shout. That's a really good shout. Because it's like my nan always refers to Bovril, and I'm like, Bovril's a different kettle of fish. You can't compare Bovril to Marmite.
It's black and it's salty. Apart from that, it is totally different. Yeah.
Totally. But thank you so much for coming on. I will link all of Will's stuff below if you want to check out anything that he's doing, especially his book, Alcohol Explained. I'll also link any contact details, social media, all of that good stuff, so that if you do want to speak to him, you can get in contact. But thank you so much for coming on. I've really enjoyed this episode and learned so much, particularly like as you've gone into detail about how alcohol affects the body, but in more detail than what, in layman's terms, but in more detail than what anyone else would do. So I really appreciate that.
No, not a problem at all. Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of the Not Quite Podcast. Please make sure you follow us on TikTok and Instagram to get regular updates about the podcast.